All right. So week two. And in week two, we are going to we're going to kind of really start to kind of dive in. So week one was just kind of to get acquainted with MySQL and just really our environment that we're going to be using as we kind of got started. So what we're going to do in week two is we're going to kind of get like a nice little foundation in SQL and some generic concepts. So this week there is a little bit of lift because you're going to learn some basic SQL queries, which is select statements. But we're also going to spend some time conceptually on databases and just general database design, which I think actually lend themselves well together. So the first thing we're going to talk about today and this week is the select list. The select clause. The select clause. I guess I should say the select statement because there's a select clause and I'm reading words on the screen talking at the same time. So anyways, just as a real quick kind of overview, in the announcement for the week, I posted some little quick bite videos that kind of go over some of these very basic topics that I think are helpful. In fact, anyways, I've gotten good feedback from them because I kind of wanted a way just kind of real quick in like a less than 5 minutes way, kind of like just get the information out there. So if you haven't seen those, I would highly recommend it. But anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about just select statements, and I'm just going to pop open these PowerPoint slides real quick just to make sure that we kind of cover everything. All right. So we're going to learn all about this. So yes, we should be good. In fact, I'm not even going to go over the PowerPoint because we're going to talk about this all anyways. So let's actually just dive right into Workbench here. There we go. Type in my password, and here we are. So I'm just going to do a new SQL query file. Close you. All right. So a select statement is basically how we pull information out of our database, which is honestly really important. I what's the reason we store it? Well, so we can use it, right? And so I kind of consider the select statement to kind of be the bread and butter, which I think it's great that the course starts out by teaching select statements, because honestly, like the easiest way to kind of get started is to kind of start exploring. And to explore, we need to be able to see what's in our database. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say use Sequila. I guess let's do this lowercase. Use Sequila. And basically what that does is it just says that's the database we want to use. Because if you look over here, I have quite a few databases that are kind of just kind of sitting there that I could use any one of those. So by saying use Sequila, I am specifying that, hey, if I execute a certain query, I want you to execute it against this specific database, because your computer, your MySQL instance that you installed could actually potentially hold multiple databases. So if you wanted to have 50 different databases, you could do that if you desired, and if your computer can do it. So anyways, we use Sequila. That's the one we're going to want to do. Now, the nice thing is, and I haven't gotten to your papers yet, but I'm excited to. One of the things that you were asked to do last week in the paper is contrast, command line versus Workbench. And in command line, we kind of walked through last week a little bit about how we can view tables and show databases and that sort of thing. So I'm going to do a little bit of that here as well. So I'm just going to quick pull over a terminal because I'm actually, well, let's just do it this way. Let's just go to the home because I know many of you have done this, have asked. So I'm just going to right click on my connection and say start command line client, because that will just pop up my window for me, which saves me a little bit of time. And then I can just say school rocks, which is my password if I can type correctly. School rocks. There we go. So I'm going to kind of walk through this side by side So we can kind of maybe get a feel for kind of what this will be like, given that if we wanted to see both. So over here, if I wanted to, so let's get to the same place. I'm going to use Sequila. There we go. We can see that the database has changed. So now I want to view tables. So I'm going to say show tables over here. And you can kind of see how we're kind of getting at the same thing. I can see all my tables over here, all my tables over here. Now let's say that I want to explore one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and let's explore the customer table. So I'm just going to hit this little caret over here, and I can see I have a couple things I can look at, but let's just look at columns. So here's my columns. Let's do the same thing here. So I'm going to do, in this case, I'm going to say describe, DESC for short, customer. And there we go. So we can see all of our columns. Now, this is where things start to differ a little bit. And one of the things that I enjoy about Workbench is it's super easy. You know, we can just click it. So for beginners, it's super easy to kind of click through, and you don't need to know a lot, and you can explore. So for you guys, I think Workbench is actually fantastic because you can explore without any of that hindrance of, you know, what command was this, and so on and so forth. Now, on the contrast to that, I do enjoy the terminal because to me, it's actually faster and I can get to things a little bit quicker and a little bit more detail. Although it's a little rough, I can get to more detail a little quicker. And really, this would help if my window was the right size. But I can get to detail quicker because I can see more about this table at an eyeball glance than I can in MySQL Workbench, because I can look at this and say, oh, you know, here's my email. It's a varchar 50, which is a string column. And hey, people don't need an email because it can be null, which we're going to talk about here shortly. So anyways, it's just some compare contrast between Workbench and the terminal. The other good thing about command line is that oftentimes we're connecting to servers, and sometimes we just need to do something really fast. And sometimes, like, you know, we're just doing some general maintenance. So depending on your role, you know, you might spend more time in command line than you ever will actually developing queries. And so in that case, you know, knowing the command line is huge. Because not only do we store data that we like want for our applications, but MySQL will actually store data about how MySQL performs, which can be really important. So moral of the story, in my opinion, is that I think it's good to know both. I think Workbench is a great starting place for beginners. I actually use both. In fact, a lot of times what I'll do is I will keep a terminal open while I have Workbench open, which is actually what I'm going to do today, because I actually like to be able to see what's in my table while I'm doing it. So back to our example, if I want to take a look at the customer table, we can open this up and see all the columns available to us, or I can describe it in the terminal. So to start off our select statement, we want to select data. Now, one of the most simple select statements that you can write is a simple, we want to select everything from customer. And by everything, we put an asterisk. That means just select all the columns. So basically, to break this down, what we're telling the database system is we want to select some columns, select some data, and then we list out what data we want to select. In this case, hey, show us all the columns. And where are we getting our data? Well, we're getting it from the customer table. And because we said use Sequila, it knows right where to find the customer table inside the Sequila database. So we can go ahead and execute this statement, and bam, there is our data. You can see that we are getting all the columns from that table. So we have quite a few here. We have a customer ID, store ID, first name, last name, email, address ID, you know, a bunch of stuff. We have some dates, integers, string columns, as we can see here. But let's say we only wanted to select a certain customer or a certain subset of customers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little clause to our select statement here. And this is where we can filter rows. So the way I kind of think about it, the select clause, which is kind of like the select statement and the clause. So a clause is kind of a portion of a statement. We call this a select statement because it's, kind of what we're doing is we're selecting data. But really this is the select list clause where we list what columns we want to see. So this will filter what columns of data we see, but the where clause will filter what rows. So to me, it's like choosing what columns we want to see, and the where clause filters what rows we want to see. So in this case, we can see we have our last name, first name, so on and so forth. And let's see how many Smiths there are. So I'm just going to say where last name is equal to Smith. Now what this is going to do is it's only going to show rows where the last name is equal to Smith. So that's how we filter the data that we want to see. Now you'll notice that we're still getting all of our columns here. So let's append this just a little bit. And I only want to see the customer ID, the first name, the last name, the email. I know we're selecting a lot, and whether they're active or not. So let's do this again. Oh, and it looks like I have a error somewhere. So I'm going to hide this for just a second so I can find my little window here because it's here somewhere. Right there. Okay. So it says, so an important part of writing our SQL statements is troubleshooting them. So whenever I run one, you'll notice like there's some action output and it'll tell us kind of like what happens. And in this case, if we look at this, it says you have an error in your SQL syntax, yada, yada. And it'll try to tell you where it is. Sometimes this is good, sometimes it's bad. But we can sometimes kind of glean what's going on here. So this one is complaining about how I have the wrong syntax starting with from customer. And if we look here, now this is, years of experience. So whenever you have an error, if you want, send me the error code. That always helps a ton. But if we look here, I actually have this extra comma. So it's expecting another column when in fact I didn't provide one. So that's actually where the error is coming from. You'll notice if I put this back, it actually highlighted the statement saying it's broken. So if I delete this comma, we should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and you'll notice that now it said, green check mark, 1 row returned. So now we're kind of back in business here. So let's take a look. And now, because we limited what columns we wanted to see, we still only get Mary Smith, but we have only the columns that we selected. Is everyone following along so far?
Yes.
Okay, yep. Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So one thing I kind of want to touch on real quick, now that we kind of have like some base components here, there is an execution order when it comes to select statements. And I think it might seem trivial, but the execution order, I don't know if you'll ever get, I don't think we ever quiz on it, but I think it's really important and really insightful when we're breaking down what a query does. And so I kind of want to highlight the way that the database system actually processes these queries because it is important. And I think logically it makes sense. So the analogy that I always like to use is if I'm going to find a book at the library or from a filing cabinet. And what's interesting is a lot of these database concepts actually come from that very system. If you remember those old indexing cabinets where you've probably heard of an index card, and that's what those are for. They were made to help us find information quicker. So you can imagine that if we had filing cabinets full of a bunch of customer information, let's say each customer has a little folder, right? So each customer has a little folder, and let's say that each I mean, this would be kind of dumb, but let's say inside of each folder is an index card with a certain piece of data, whether it be their customer ID, first name, last name, email, so on and so forth. So let's say your boss comes to you and he says, hey, you know what? I need some data on a customer, and I need Mary Smith's customer ID, first name, last name, and email, and whether she's active or not. So you say, okay, so you walk up to the set of filing cabinets, and you know which set of filing cabinets to go to because you're looking for a customer. So let's say that there's one filing cabinet that says customer. So that's the first thing that the database is going to do as well. Same thing as what we would do is the same thing the database is going to do. So it's going to first identify where are we getting our data from. And so the from clause is the first thing that's going to run. So I'm just going to put a little note here. So the from clause, we need to know where our data is coming from first. So we go to that filing cabinet. Great. We open it up. There's our from clause. Next, we want to find Mary Smith's folder, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to then start sifting through all of the folders to find Mary Smith. In this case, there could be multiple, or in this case, our boss said, hey, I want to know everyone who's a Smith and this information on them. In this case, there's only one. So we're going to start sifting through the folders in there, and we're going to go folder by folder, just like we would. That's what I love about what I love about databases is the fact that it's very humanistic. Or maybe humans are just very efficient over time, whichever came first. But as we're going, we're going to flip through the tabs on our folders, our little manila folders, and we might hit a Betty White. Nope. We might hit the same thing. So what it's going to do is it's going to go row by row, and it's going to say, hey, is your last name equal to Smith? If the answer is true, then we're going to pull that folder out. If the answer is false, we're just going to skip it and go to the next one. So just to iterate this, I'm actually going to take and copy this, and let's just pull it down here. But this time we're going to take out the where clause because we're going to just pretend we were doing this. So just like I said, we're going to go through, we're going to say, hey, is your last name Smith? Yes, it is. Pull the folder out. Is your last name Smith? Nope, 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 so on and so forth. Now we know that there's only one. Because this is where computers are really nice. So instead of going through all, multiple hundreds of 600 customers folders, we can then stop and say, hey, you know what? There's only one Smith, so I'm not going to dig any further. So that's what it does. So the next step is the where clause. We want to filter out the data that we want. All right, and so now the last component that we have thus far is we want to choose the individual components that we want to show. So now if we run this again, we want to only show specific things, and that is our select list. So right here, our list of columns that we want to display. So in this case, we've yanked the folder out. And we don't want to just like take the whole folder to our boss because he only wanted to see so many things. And, there could be 100 little index cards in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out the index card for customer ID, first name, last name, email, and active. Because out of the multiple columns that could possibly be in there, he only wants to see those 5. So that's what we show next. And so the select list. And that is kind of how we display it. Now, this is a pretty simple one. And there's a couple more components we could add. But real quick, I just want to make sure, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit because I think we're getting it. There's a couple more clauses, and one of those is the order by clause. And depending on what clauses we have can kind of sift things down. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an order by. And let's say we want to order this by, and let's change this. Let's say we only want to see active customers just so we get a few more records. Where active is equal to 1. And we want to order by last name and first name. So what this is going to do is it's going to alphabetize our records. And we're going to start with A is last name. and go up, and then first name second. So we're going to have, in this case, if we had 2 Adams and one, let's see if we have 2 that are the same. I don't know if we do. Barnett. So, oh no, there's not. There's only, that's Barnett and Barrett. But anyways, it's going to first alphabetize by last name and then by first name. So if we have an order by clause, that actually happens before the select. So this actually is order by, and then the select is actually number 4. Basically, the select list is always last, because basically we compile all of our data and then we choose what we want to show. That's kind of how I like to think about it. So that's with an order by clause. And the final clause is, well, there's technically 2, but there's a group by. But to do a group by, we kind of have to change the way that we're looking at our data, because we're going to have to aggregate. So what we're going to do is we want to see, let's say, and maybe we should just make another one. Yes, let's make another one. So let's say we want to look at another table, and let's take a look at this payment table. And inside of our payment table, we have all the data of our revenue essentially, but every time someone rented a movie, we're going to log how much they, how much their payment was to us, and that's a payment. So if we wanted to kind of see some data, let's just start by selecting everything for payment. It's kind of my go-to. If I want to kind of see things, I just kind of view it all. And we can see here we have a customer ID and our amount. So if I wanted to see, how much each customer spent with us, I could do something like this: customer ID, and then we want the sum of amount as total revenue from payment. Now, if I were to try to run this, it won't work because we need the thing that we're missing. So we're going to add a group by clause. And just so you know, this is something we're not going to touch for a little bit. So I just kind of want to make you aware of it. But we're going to group by customer ID. And basically that means, hey, I want the sum of total revenue based on the customer. So, if I just had sum, just like in Excel, if I just did the sum of an entire column or row, it's just going to give me everybody's. But if we want to see it by certain individuals, we either need to do individual sum equations, so to speak. So that's basically what we're saying here, is we want it to do individual sums per customer. So if I run this, now we get the customer ID with their total revenue. So if we have a group by, that actually comes before the order by. It actually is right here. So group by, order by, and select. And there's one more actually, where we can say having a total revenue that is greater than $100. So basically what this is doing is we have our where clause. So let's just do this. Let's say where amount is less than, let's say $5, or let's pick a specific, let's say it's less than $5, because we kind of have two things going on here. We can filter our original data, which is our base data. So if I selected everything from payment, we have our individual records here, which is what this where clause is going to filter. So let's say where we want it, where the amount is less than $5 and the year of payment date is equal to, let's say 2005, right? So basically we want all of our payments that are in 2005 and the amount was less than $5. And furthermore, we're going to then sum all the revenue per customer, and we're only wanting to see the customers who had a total revenue that was greater than $100. So let's see if we get anyone, and sure enough, we have some in there. Not very many, but some. In fact, we have a total of 9. So 9 people in 2005, spent $100 or more on well, spent, I guess, $100 or more on transactions that were less than $5, so to speak. So anyways, there is a halving clause, and that filters our aggregations, and that comes directly after the group by. So really our group by and our halving clause are completely, well, really a lot of these are optional, but they are super optional unless we're doing aggregations. So aggregations only. Let's just put that right here as well. So at the end of the day, when we do our select order, this is kind of the way it goes. So we start by choosing where we get our data from. We filter down to what we want, what rows we want to see. If we're going to do any sort of, summation or grouping, we can then do that and filter our aggregations. And then finally, we choose how we want to sort our data. And then finally, we choose what we want to show. All right, everyone with me so far? And again, don't worry so much on the aggregations yet, because we're going to get to that. I just kind of wanted to make sure we got the order in. Great. Okay. So now we're going to kind of dive into some of the funner stuff for the week. So in the course this week, if we were to look at module 2, our paper this week isn't really a paper. We're actually going to build a video presentation of how we're going to reverse engineer a website. So what I wanted to do is kind of walk through some basic database design with you and really kind of do one of these together. So basically what we're asking is to build some sort of an ERD or kind of a spreadsheet. And I'm going to be honest with you, the ERD is actually probably easier than the spreadsheet, but I'm going to try to do a little bit of both. The ERD I'll specifically do, but I'm going to make a spreadsheet as well. So we can kind of, if you want to keep it more simple, we can do so. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to pick something to break down. Basically, we're going to kind of theorize how it works, and then try to kind of build a database based on this. So what I'm going to actually choose to do is actually something like Canvas. So specifically in Canvas, what I kind of want to track is who is in which course and maybe their final grade, right? Something along those lines, maybe assignments, we'll see kind of how far we get. So anyways, that's what I'm going to do. So thinking of Canvas, it's something we all used. We're going to start to kind of think about how databases work. So I'm going to start in the spreadsheet, and then we'll kind of move over to the table. So what I like to do, and you can kind of go about this however you want, and what I want to highlight is that this is a learning experience. That's what I love about the papers portion of this course. Whether you're actually writing a paper, or you're doing an exercise like this, is it doesn't need to be 100% accurate. In fact, I'm sure mine won't be 100% accurate specifically for this exercise, but it's okay if things are wrong. And so don't stress so much about being accurate. This is more just to kind of get your thoughts going around, how would I do that? And thinking about how we're going to separate data and join data. So that in mind, what I always like to do is I like to start with kind of the base piece of data. And what I like to do is I like to create little mind maps. And so normally what I do is I actually, I have a little iPad with a pencil that I use for notes for work. And usually what I do is I start with just bubbles, and I'll say, what's kind of the base of my project? And in this case, what are we doing in Canvas? Well, we're managing students. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a student table. But what I'm going to do, because I'm thinking ahead here, because I kind of want to introduce a couple of concepts that I think will be interesting and helpful for you as you think about it. So, we want to manage students, but what are students? Well, students are people. So the first table I'm going to create is a people table, and I'm actually going to call this person. And just, I like to keep my table names. Technically, I like to keep them uppercase. So let's do that. I'm going to try it. So person, you can choose the common nomenclature for MySQL, and this varies from database to database, but in MySQL, the commonplace is really, like on lowercase with underscores, as you can see from the tables that we have in Sakila, film underscore actor, all lowercase. So each one kind of has their preference. But anyways, you can kind of do what you want. I'm going to do mine. I'm actually going to do mine lowercase. So I stay kind of clean to what MySQL is. So anyways, I'm going to have this person table. So I'm going to put the table name here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out some columns. And so what makes up a person? So this is kind of my process. What makes up a person? Well, every person that we want to have an identifier for. So just like every student has a student number, we want an ID, and that ID is only going to be used once, and it's going to be completely unique. It's never going to be recycled. So I'm going to do this person ID, and really this just lives for applications and for the databases. We don't really care about this number. And it's an integer, so I'm going to put an int. So basically I'm going to have a column name, data type, nullable, keys. So I'm just going to throw this up here just a little bit. Bam. Make this big, put a border underneath it. Okay. So here's kind of my structure here. So a person ID, is it nullable? No. And is it a key? We're going to put primary. And in the primary key, honestly, like I'm putting this here so I can discuss it. You don't necessarily need to know, but this null, what it's saying is, can it be empty, or does someone need to have one of these? Like, are we ever going to let someone be in our database without having this column? And the answer is no. Everybody needs an ID. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to have a first name column, and let's have this be a varchar, and we're going to make that 60 characters long. Is it nullable? No, we don't want anyone without a first name. Keys is no. So then at this point we just go on. Last name, again, a varchar, which is just a string. And what the 60 denotes is how many characters long are we going to allow us to give for this column. And the reason why we want to be specific is we want to allow enough room to get the data that we want to store, but we don't want it huge, because let's say we're like Facebook and we have 1 million rows. If we have 1 million rows and we opted for the biggest one, even though like they may or may not use it all of that storage is being used, because at any point we could go and make our name bigger. So as far as actual storage on your computer, on the server, it's important to keep those data types lean. We want to make sure we we give ourselves what we need, but we don't want to be excessive, too excessive anyways. And no, people have to have a last name, middle name. Now, not everybody has a middle name. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this be nullable, meaning that someone can be inserted without necessarily having a middle name. Finally, I'm going to put in birth date. And this one, we're going to do a varchar, and this one, we're just going to do a 1. This one, we want to do date. Is it nullable? No, you have to have a birth date to be in Canvas. Actually, let's go ahead and put yes. maybe people don't want to disclose their birth date. And then finally, we're going to put, let's just leave it just like that. We're going to kind of keep it somewhat simple. So here's our person table. I'm actually going to pull this down, and no, let's leave it there. So let's just put a little comment here. I'm going to just say a table to hold person information. All right, so there's our person table. So this is one way you can kind of go about doing this. If you want to do it in Excel, you can do it that way. But what I'm going to show you now is what I think is the almost easier way. And that's actually in Workbench. And this is pretty cool. So in Workbench, what you're going to do if you want to do it this way is we can, let me make this bigger. We can go up here to File, and we're going to say, let's see, how do we do this? We're going to say New Model. So File, New Model. And once we're in here, it's kind of open up this new thing. It's going to say MySQL model. And right here, we can, we're going to click on this Add Diagram button. So I'm just going to double click on this, and it's going to open up this kind of grid for me. Now, this is pretty cool. This is a nice way for you guys to start building databases that's a little bit guided, in my opinion, which is really nice, especially for this exercise. So I'm going to recreate my person table in here. So over here on these list of buttons, there's a little table, and it's kind of hard to see. I apologize, but you can click there, and it doesn't do much. But then if we, you'll see it kind of has some stuff here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click in the grid here. So once I click on the table, click in the grid, and it will throw this table here. And it'll just be called table 1 by default with no columns. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on this, and it pops open this nice little editor. And this is where we can throw our same stuff in here. So the first thing we're going to do is call a person table. We can leave everything else the same. Then we're going to go over this columns tab, and we're just going to start putting our stuff in here, our columns. Person ID, it's an int data type. PK stands for primary key. NN stands for not null. UK, ignore right now. Ignore these. The only ones that I think we're going to worry about is primary key, not null. And this AI stands for auto increment, meaning, hey, if this is an identifier, every time we insert a new person, automatically just generate the ID for me, which is exactly what we want. That's kind of the de facto standard. Unless you have a reason not to auto increment, people are going to auto increment, which is perfectly fine. Great. So let's just keep going. First name, varchar 60 is what I think we said. Change that there. We said they can't be null. Same thing with last name. Varchar 60, not null. And then we had a middle name. Varchar 60. And that one could be null. And then finally, we're going to have our birth date. And that one is going to be a date, not a date time, just a date, because we don't care what time you were born. We just want to know the date. Okay, so there's our person table. So you can see that's pretty slick. That's as far as creating a table, that's all it takes, is that right there. So next, what we're going to do, let's just go ahead and create another table. So after we have our person table, the next thing I think we want to do is identify whether you're a student or a teacher, because there's both in Canvas. And the idea behind databases is we want to keep things as isolated as possible. We want to make sure that, we're storing things efficiently. So in this case, we're keeping all of the people in a single table, and we're going to use another table to kind of identify, what they are. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to call this an enrollment. Because what makes a student? Well, a student is a person who has an enrollment in a school, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to first start off with our enrollment ID. Int primary key not null auto increment. That's kind of generic. And then what we're going to do, this is kind of where the key to relational databases are. So this is kind of the bread and butter. And this is the part that you really need to think about, because we want to connect an enrollment to a person. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put person ID right in here. Person ID. And that is going to, we want it to match the data type. So we know that's int in the person ID table and not null. We're going to mark that as not null. Now what I'm going to do, what we just did is we added a column called person ID. It's an integer to match this, but you'll notice that these aren't connected in any way, but we want to connect them. So over here, there's this tab that's called foreign keys. I'm going to click on there. And if I double click on here, it's going to kind of generate one for me. And all I have to do is in the reference table, choose the table I want to connect to. So in this case, person. And you'll notice that now it kind of built this little connector. And then I choose what column it connects to. So I say person. So now you can see that we have this nice little connector, and it's a dot dashed line. That means, hey, if I hover over this line, it shows me exactly how this is connected. These person IDs are now linked, meaning that if I have an enrollment that has a person ID, it will match a person ID over here. Everyone kind of following along with that so far?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to kind of move a little bit faster now. So we have a person ID. I'm going to put a start date and an end date. And what that is going to do is it's going to let people have multiple enrollments, all kind of like historical. So we can kind of track things through time. So everyone has a start date. You don't necessarily need an end date because someone might be kind of ongoing. So we're going to leave that kind of there. So another date. All right, so there's our enrollment. So for example, you know, Frodo might be in, you know, the University of Ring Bears, you know, and he started on July 1st, 2001, and he's still going to this day, because we all know that carrying the one true ring is something that you just never truly learn how to do. So let's build another one. So Mr. Frodo Baggins, while he's learning how to carry his ring, well, actually, let's switch to Jedi's because that's easier. So Rey is in Jedi school, and she started July 1st, 2001. And the next thing we want is a course, right? What course are you in? But this course is not necessarily what course you're in. It's just a list of courses. So the first thing I want to do is add my primary key. That's always first. Set it to auto increment, and then I'm going to say name. And what I like to do is I'm not going to do course name because we're already in the course table. So there might be a, you know, a school, and inside school it has a column called name, but we kind of know what it's isolated to the table it's in. So I don't really get too ambitious about saying, oh, this is the course name. Like I just put name. Courses might have a number. Like, for example, CIT225. So I'm going to leave that just like this. I'm just going to lower this one. Let's say it could be 10 long. The name, yeah, let's leave it at that. We're going to make these both not null. Yeah, there's our course. All right, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to build a section. So this is kind of, you know, as we're thinking about how things works, that's kind of like the tricky part. We say, you know, oh, like what pieces of data do I need to make this work? You know, and in Canvas's kind of workflow, you know, you're in a course, but you're also, you know, there's many sections of a course. So we're going to build a section, and each section is tied to a course ID. You know, because we're not in, you know, section 11 of CIT225 is of CIT225, not CIT, you know, 111. So we want to make sure that we are attaching to the right course. So we're going to do the same thing again, just to kind of show it. We're going to click on foreign keys, just double click here. We choose course and course ID, and there it is. You can see that little connection start, and there it is. And now we're going to go here to what section do we have? We have a number, section number. Cool. And then what we're going to do is, if we can get that to go, number. And the number is actually just an integer as well, and it cannot be null. So there's that. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to build we want a way to kind of store who is in this section, who's attached to this section. Now, this one we're going to get a little interesting with, because we have students and we're going to have teachers. So what we need to do is let's identify our teacher real fast. So this table is going to be called let's call it employment. So we're going to have in our employment ID int primary key auto increment. We're going to have a person ID because we want to attach it to a person. Basically, this is going to hold, who's employed. So again, foreign keys, double click, let it auto generate a name, person, we're good. And we want to track when they start. So start date is a date. They have to have one of those, and end date, yada, yada. There we go. We're going to leave that one just like that. So now we kind of have two sides of the coin. People are either students with an enrollment or staff with an employment, which is pretty neat because we have them all on the same list, but we kind of can separate them. So next, what we're going to do is, and you know what I forgot from the person table is I forgot like email and password. Just those ones, but those are important. All right, so now that we kind of have those, now we kind of want to tie these kind of two together because we have our people, we have our courses and our sections. So now we kind of want to make this whole thing come together, and we want to kind of show, who's attached to this specific course section. So what we're going to call this is we're going to call this a section enrollment. All right. So inside of this, we're going to have a section enrollment ID, primary key auto increment, and we're going to have a section ID. Section ID int not null, and yeah, that doesn't like to save that, does it? And our person ID, we want to track who's in there, and specifically when. So I'm going to put not null, and then we're going to put date at, or let's just keep things simple. So we're going to say start date, which is a date. Not null, and our end date. Date, not null. And then we also want a role, but we're going to get to that because we don't have a role table. So I'm going to real quick connect these ones. So here's our first one. We want to connect to section on section ID. And then we want to connect to person on person ID. So now you can see now all this is starting to come together. We have our two kind of sides of the coin connected. Now, the one thing that we have is we kind of have a person, and we could kind of glean whether they're a student or a teacher, but let's say that they could be both, which is possible. for example, a TA might be a student and somewhat of a teacher. So let's add another one. So we're going to call this a section role. And our section role table is going to have things like, are you a TA? Are you a student? Are you an instructor? So forth. So we're going to say name varchar 45 will work. It's not null. And I'm also going to have a teacher access flag. And this teacher access flag is going to act as a checkbox, essentially, if we were building a web page like Canvas, where essentially we can mark whether that role has access to the teacher portion of Canvas. So now I'm going to go back in my section enrollment, and we want to mark who has access to what in here. So we're going to add a section role ID, which is an int, not null. Then we're going to just go and add this as a foreign key. So section role and section role ID. There we go. So that is our ERD. So at this point, we could actually kind of make this a functioning database. And I have 3 minutes. So let me ask this for those of you here, because this is actually what we kind of need for the deliverable. So at this point, you would create this, on your own, and then for 3-5 minutes, what you're going to do is you're going to walk through this. So let me just kind of like what I did, just in short form. So say, oh, I reverse engineered Canvas, and basically I started with PersonTable that would commonly hold all the people, because I wanted to keep data as centralized as possible. Then I created a way for a student to have an enrollment in school, and furthermore, a person to have an employment record. Every person can be enrolled in a section, and in that section, every person has a role, whether that be student, employee, or teacher assistant. And then we have our course and our sections that kind of link up to the section enrollment. And kind of just walk through your process, what you did for a little bit. So kind of just like on the way I was going, maybe just elaborate a little bit more, talk about any issues you had, anything enlightening that you might have seen, so on and so forth. That's what the paper is this week. So not too crazy. And again, it's okay if it's not accurate. It's okay if you struggle. It doesn't need to be done necessarily, right? Like if you spend 3 hours and you kind of like have this kind of mess, that's fine. Make your video and kind of just talk through what your goal was, and what stumbling blocks you hit along the way, right? So it doesn't need to be perfect. So don't, what I'm trying to say is don't waste a lot of time trying to make something perfect, because it's, this is only week 2. So this is more just like a trial and error exercise. So I guess at that point, do you guys feel comfortable with this, or would it be helpful for me to kind of put some data in here so we can see how it looks on the other end, or do you feel like this is good for now?
I think this is good for now.
Okay. Great. So we're kind of right on the hour mark. So, and I don't want to keep you guys too long. So this is kind of the big kind of lift for the week. If you run into any issues, I am more than happy to kind of like give you some ideas for tables. So if you get stuck, if you're like, wow, I have no idea where to even begin, just let me know. Let me know like kind of one you're thinking of, whether it be like an e-commerce store, or, maybe you like baseball and you like to track baseball stats. You can find a baseball website to kind of reverse engineer, so on and so forth. More than happy to kind of help get you started and kind of keep you plugging along. So don't sit too long, like with your face kind of like, scraping up against your keyboard as you're trying to force your brain to learn something. If you're stuck, feel free to reach out. But otherwise, good luck this week. Reach out if you have any questions, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.